Welcome back to our explainer on the history of money. This is part 3, and today we are tackling a huge question. What really changed in ancient Greece when coins first appeared? We're going to see how these little stamped pieces of metal ended up becoming the very heart of the city-state and even the foundation of democracy itself. All right, so let's just dive right in by, challenging the story that pretty much all of us learned in school. The myth is that money was invented just to make barter easier, right? For market convenience. But the reality? Well, the reality is something completely different and way more dramatic. It was all about the needs of the state. Yeah, the historical record is pretty clear on this. The first coins weren't minted so a baker could easily trade bread for pottery. Nope, they were created by the state for the state. We're talking about a political and military invention. It was a tool of power long before it ever became a tool of everyday commerce. Okay, so let's really dig in and dismantle this old textbook story. And to do that, we first have to get a picture of what Greece was actually like before coins ever existed. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. Pre-coinage Greece was not some primitive barter economy. Not at all. They had really sophisticated accounting systems, kind of like what we saw in ancient Mesopotamia. They used abstract units of account, think things like the value of an ox or a measure of grain, to calculate debts, taxes, all sorts of obligations. Society already had this complex language of value. All coinage really did was put that language onto a physical object. Now, all of this was happening during a massive shift in power. For centuries, society was run by the oikos, these big, private, self-sufficient households of the aristocracy. But then, around the 7th century BC, something new comes along, the polis, the city-state, a community run by its citizens. And believe me, this new way of organizing society came with a whole new set of problems that needed solving. So you have this new political entity, the polis, and it desperately needed a new operating system, a way to manage its resources, project its power, and organize all its citizens. And that's exactly where coinage comes into the picture. First up, the state needed to be solvent. I mean, think about it. Before coins, trying to pay for something with gold or silver was a total pain. You had to weigh it, test its purity. There was so much friction. But by stamping its official seal on a piece of metal, the polis was basically making a promise. It was saying, hey, we guarantee this has a specific weight and purity. And just like that, the friction was gone. This let the state mobilize resources almost instantly to pay for big things, like warships or public buildings. Second, and this one is a really big deal, it was a military necessity. The Greek world was a place of constant conflict, and wars were more and more being fought by paid professionals, mercenaries. And these guys, they needed to get paid right away, with something they could carry and something that everyone would accept. You just can't pay an army with IOUs or giant, heavy bags of grain. So coinage, it wasn't just convenient, it was a weapon of survival. And third, coins created a whole new fiscal architecture for the state. You have to remember, the polis was a big administrative machine, and suddenly everything, court fines, taxes, donations to temples, public salaries, it could all be handled with one single standardized unit. The coin became this powerful symbol of public trust, a seal of guarantee from the state itself. Okay, so let's see how all this actually played out in the most famous city-state of them all, Athens, because this is where all these different threads really come together and honestly change the entire course of history. So, a really pivotal moment for Athens, and really for the whole world, came when they discovered these massive silver deposits at the Laurion mines. And we're not talking about just a little bit of silver here. This was an absolute treasure trove, and it forced the citizens of Athens to make a huge, monumental decision. At first, the plan was simple. Just divide up all that silver and give every citizen a nice cash payout. But a statesman named Themistocles, he had a much different and pretty radical idea. He managed to convince the citizens to forget their personal payouts. Instead, he said, let's invest this entire windfall into building a state-of-the-art navy. We're talking 200 warships. And it was that fleet that went on to defeat the massive Persian invasion and, well, save Greece. Well, this huge strategic investment meant they had to mass produce a standardized coin, right? You got to pay for the ships, the thousands of rowers, the soldiers. And the result was the famous Athenian owl. And because Athens was so incredibly strict about keeping its purity and weight consistent, it became the ancient world's most trusted currency. It was basically the dollar of antiquity. Everybody used it, friends and enemies all across the Mediterranean. But here's the thing. This new fire hose of money, it didn't just fund wars. It also flowed right into the political system, and it completely transformed it from the inside out. See, Athenian democracy wasn't something you just did in your spare time. It wasn't a volunteer gig. It was a paid political system. Citizens literally got paid a salary in coin for their time, for serving on juries, for going to the public assembly, for holding public office. And this point is so important. By paying people to participate, Coinage tore down the financial wall that had always kept politics as a playground for the rich. A poor farmer could now actually afford to leave his fields for a day to go serve on a jury because he'd get paid for it. So in a very real way, coinage became the lifeblood of democracy. It was the material foundation of political equality. So this just brilliantly flips the old textbook story on its head, doesn't it? It wasn't the market that created the need for money. It was the other way around. The state, the polis, first pumped coins into the economy through public spending, paying soldiers, sailors, jurors, you name it. Then all these citizens had coins in their pockets, and that created a huge demand for things to buy. It was only then that all these private retail markets popped up to capture all that new cash. The state created the market, not the other way around. But, like with any powerful new technology, there was a dark side to all this. The invention of coinage created this deep and very lasting paradox. So on the one hand, coinage was great for equality inside the city walls. It funded democracy, it let poor citizens have a real say in their government. But on the other hand, it fueled massive inequality and imperialism outside those walls. I mean, the very same financial power that paid for those democratic juries also paid for the armies that went out to dominate other city-states and demand tribute, usually in coin. It also completely changed the very nature of work. Before coins, most workers were basically tied to a single household, an oikos, and they just worked for room and board. Coinage completely shattered those old bonds. For the first time, people could sell their labor for something portable and universally valuable, money. And that allowed them to move to cities, to become artisans or traders or craftsmen. It created this whole new mobile working class. So the key thing to remember is that this money revolution didn't just happen by chance. It happened in Greece because of a perfect storm, really. You had four key ingredients: a political structure of independent city-states, constant military competition that required mercenaries, a democratic system that paid people to participate, and, of course, the raw resources, those massive silver mines to make it all happen. And this model, the one born in ancient Greece, it really set the template for the entire world that followed. This whole coinage revolution, it was never just about making trade easier. It was about building a powerful state and an engaged society. It created the fundamental system we still live with today, where money is that critical meeting point between the state, the market, and the citizen. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that understanding where money really came from, not as some happy accident of the market, but as a deliberate political tool designed to run a society and wage war. It forces us to ask some pretty big questions about money's role in our own world. It makes you wonder, if that's how it all started, what is its fundamental purpose today?